I have to say, I'm looking back at your bookshelves because, I interview a lot of authors and it's like, man, I would love a tour of your bookshelves, but is there any rhyme or reason to the organization behind you there?
Not much. Some of these back here, some of these are my own books. And then over other way, right back there are some bobbleheads and things. So it's pretty half-assed.
Gotcha. By the way, I'm going to ask you right now. I mean, is there one book in there that you would pick out, one of the most influential books that you have read in your life that has just had an impact on you that you would want to share with people?
Well, there might be one. It's actually, I think I actually was looking at it the other day. So it's on my desk somewhere, which is this book right here, Working by Studs Terkel, which came out in 1974 and is a chronicle of what people's lives are like at work. Studs Terkel, the great radio journalist from Chicago, interviewed people from all different kinds of workplaces. And I read that. I actually read it when I was a kid, and loved it, and have loved it ever since.
Huh. So you've gone back and reread that?
Yeah. And even I happened to have it on my desk because I was arguing with somebody about something, and I had to quote a line from the book here, actually literally from the first page of the text.
I see. I'm sorry to get you off track, but you got to read the line to me. You got to tell me the content.
Yeah. No. Well, we were talking about how we were having this conversation about whether, it's when we think about our work, whether it's better just to say, let's just do your work and don't think about work as a source of satisfaction. It's a way to, find satisfaction in other elements of your life, and that this constant search for work that is significant and purposeful is in some ways a fool's errand, because that's not the domain of life where we should seek those sorts of things. And I disagreed with that. And, here's Studs Terkel, who interviewed people doing all kinds of different jobs. So if you look at even in this index here, a jockey, a baseball player, a gas meter reader, a supermarket box boy, a supermarket checker, a sky cap. Even some of these names are old fashioned. A labor organizer, a bank teller, a bookbinder, a piano tuner. And he's saying, Studs Terkel says in the very top of this book, literally the first page of the introduction, about work, he says, it is about a search for daily meaning as well as daily bread, for recognition as well as cash, for astonishment rather than torpor. So even he, 40 years ago, was talking about these things.
Look, this is the perfect segue into your new book, which is The Power of Regret, and I love the subtitle, How Looking Backward Moves Us Forward. I really want to speak to you before New Year's. This is the Wavemaker Conversations New Year's episode, because this is a period where we look backwards, hopefully, to then look forwards and create the conditions for a better new year. Yeah. And this idea of finding daily meaning in work and maybe regretting the idea that, maybe I didn't find enough meaning in my work this year. Maybe next year I will. But let me start with, first of all, thank you for joining me on Wavemaker Conversations 2 months before the release of your book. I've pre-ordered it, and I can't wait to read it. So, I played a clip for you of Dr. Irvin Yalom, another great author. He's one of those books that I pull out of my shelf a lot. And as a therapist, and he and I calculated it together in our conversation, he's done roughly 50,000 hours of therapy with patients.
Oh my gosh.
He's in his late 80s now. And he
That's
said,
great.
and you heard him say this, he said he likes the therapeutic value of exploring regrets, because in his words, if we were to meet 1 year from now, how could you possibly have lived a regret-free life? What could you do differently so that you wouldn't be constantly building up regrets, which you use to judge yourself adversely? I go to you now, Daniel Pink, you have taken this concept, you've gone global with it. Tell us about the power of regret and what you've learned.
Well, so Michael, one of the things that I did for this book was look at about 40 years of academic research on regret, which is pretty interesting. And what that tells us pretty clearly is that everybody has regrets. It's part of the human condition. Our cognitive machinery is programmed for regret. And so this idea that's out there of no regrets as a life philosophy is complete crap. It's wrong. I mean, it's wrong. It's wrong in the sense that it's bad advice. It's also wrong in the sense that it's not accurate. The only people without regrets are 5-year-olds, people with brain damage, and sociopaths. The rest of us have regrets. They make us human. And the other thing that this research tells us is that regret makes us better. That if we deal with them properly, as he's saying from 50,000 years of 50,000 hours of he's not that old, 50,000 hours of therapy, that they can actually make us better. And there's a lot of evidence showing it can help improve our decision making. It can deepen our sense of meaning, as we've been talking about earlier, and it can help us perform better on a whole array of professional and academic tasks.
So do two things for me, because I know, and we don't want to give away too much of the book, because we really do want people to buy this book. But you actually launched a global survey. Yeah. And it reminded me of something, our first conversation was back in 2013 on your book, To Sell is Human, The Surprising Truth About Moving Others. And you almost, sort of reframe the idea of salesmanship and what selling is. And you did that with a survey. You asked people how much time do you spend trying to move others, to convince them to give something in exchange for what you've got? What have you learned? You did this global survey of regrets. What did you learn from the global survey?
Well, so among the things that we did was we collected over 16,000, close to 17,000 regrets now from people in 105 countries. It's extraordinary. We have this incredible database of regrets from around the world. And what it tells us is that to understand regret, we have to look deeper. Traditional research had looked at regrets as in the domains of life. So this is an education regret, and this is a career regret, and this is a romance regret. And what I found is that deep down there's a deeper structure to regret, that around the world, people regret the same 4 things. And what's interesting about these 4 core regrets is that they operate as a photographic negative of the good life. That is, if we understand what people regret the most, we understand what they value the most. And so this emotion of regret actually ends up being a pathway to understanding what makes life worth living.
I love that image, photographic negative of the good life. Do you want to give away the 4 regrets or one of them?
Sure. Well, I'll tell you one of them, because it comes out very strongly, and it's one of the things that at the end of the year I think people can really focus on. And I also did another piece of research where I did a quantitative survey, basically a giant opinion poll of 4,489 Americans, asking some other questions about regret. And one of the things that comes out in that quantitative survey is that people overwhelmingly regret what they didn't do much more than what they did. That regrets of inaction dramatically outnumber regrets of action. And one of the 4 core regrets is what I call boldness regrets. People regret not being bold. And what's key here is that it doesn't matter the domain of life that they're in. So I have literally hundreds of people in that qualitative database regretting not asking somebody out on a date years ago, not pursuing a romantic interest 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago. But I also have huge numbers of people who regret not starting a business. I have huge numbers of people who regret not speaking up. That was surprising to me. Huge numbers of people, even using that phrase, I wish I had spoken up. I wish I had asserted myself. And so what you see here is what I think is this is revealing is this need that we have to do something, to sort of like this hysterical thing, to pursue something significant, to take a chance. And while I have people among these almost 17,000 who regretted, say, oh, I started a business and it was a total disaster and I wish I hadn't done that. There are people like that, no question. But for every one of those, I probably have 20 who regret not doing that. And so I think one of the lessons as we get to the end of the year is if you reflect on your life and say, was I bold enough? Did I take that chance? And you didn't. That's a very common regret, but you have to use that as a guidance for next year and actually just go out and take that chance. And if you use that thinking style that we were talking about before, where you go out a year from now and reflect back, what I think the evidence shows overwhelmingly is that a year from now, you're less likely to regret taking a chance, and you're really likely to regret not taking a chance. So the takeaway is take the chance. Whether it's in your romantic life, whether it's in your business life, whether it's simply in your community speaking up, take the chance.
That's now my brain goes immediately to, okay, what chances should I take? Which should I choose? There are so many opportunities to be bold.
Yeah. Well, yes and no. I think you have to think about, where in your life boldness is called for. I don't think boldness is called for in every domain of your life. So if there is, I'm really surprised by the amount of regrets dealing with love and not taking chances in love and romance. So if there's someone who you like, someone who you're attracted to, ask him or her out. You're not gonna, if you get rejected, it's not gonna feel good, but that momentary pain is gonna be less severe than the lingering pain of you're thinking about it for 30 years. And believe me, I've got people who are thinking about these missed romantic opportunities literally 40 years later. And again, if you're thinking about, hey, maybe I should not be stuck in this lackluster job and try something more risky, I would say take the sensible risk, because a year from now, even if it doesn't work out, you're less likely to regret taking a chance and failing than you are not taking a chance. And this is not some kind of this is not kind of my own kind of philosophy or exhortation. This is what 16,000 people around the world are telling me.
16,000 people around the world are telling you this, by the way, from a wide variety of backgrounds. How did you find these people?
Well, again, the qualitative survey, the collection it's not a random sample. So it just I invited people to submit regrets, and so there's an inherent bias. For instance, there's an inherent bias toward English. So most of the people who submitted were English speakers. We have the site available in Chinese. We have it available in Spanish. We had some submissions in French and in Portuguese. But I'm missing big parts of the world in that regard.
It's interesting because this, I'm just thinking, this book, which will have some web presence, should really be, to use the wave metaphor of Wavemaker. I mean, this should be a living, breathing thing, because sometimes when people share their regrets and you see others who are struggling with these regrets and they sort of define them for you, you're more willing to volunteer your own and to think about it.
That is a hugely important point. Hugely important point. And again, it's one of these things where, for me as a writer, as just someone sort of understanding the world, if you're going to make a claim, if you're going to sort of say you understand something, that likely response is, how do you know? Okay, how do you know these things? And what's interesting with the regret is that when I look at the science, this 40 years of science, and when I look at what 16,000 people around the world and 4,000 plus people in the United States are telling me, they really converge. It's like I feel more certain in the knowledge, because the hard-headed analytic academic research and the stories of people are basically saying the same thing. And what you're saying is extraordinarily important. One of the things that we know about reckoning with regret is that disclosing it is itself useful. And we often don't realize that. There's some really, really interesting research showing that our fears about disclosure, self-disclosure, particularly of things that are negative. So if I disclose that I wasn't kind to somebody, or if I disclose that I bullied some kid in school, we have a lot of bullying regrets. If I disclose that I cheated a business partner, or those kinds of things, we tend to, or if I disclose that I had an extramarital affair, if I disclose that I was too much of a wimp to speak up, or I disclose that I've always wanted to start a business, but I never got off my butt to do it. When we feel bad about ourselves in that. And so we don't want to disclose because we think that by disclosing, people will think less of it. And what the research shows is that when we disclose our vulnerabilities, people like us more, not less. That's the extraordinary thing. And there's also research showing, as I said before, that the act of disclosure is itself at least somewhat therapeutic. So that even to the point where, so James Pennebaker at the University of Texas has great research showing that if you simply write about this stuff for 15 minutes a day for yourself, that itself is helpful. So this idea that I mean, your metaphor of waves is important here, because what happens is that if somebody discloses, they lift a little bit of the burden, but by sharing with others, they signal to others that they can do the same thing, and so you have this, your metaphor of waves.
Yeah. And we, as fellow parents, we've seen this. I'm sure you've seen it in parent communities. How's everything going? Perfect. The kids are perfect. Right. The family is perfect. And then when you meet those families who are willing to expose a little bit more,
exactly,
that's where the relationships become deeper.
Absolutely right. Absolutely right. And again, we have this. I mean, it's interesting. I mean, sociologists have been talking about this for 70 years in this qualitative way. Irving Goffman, the great sociologist, wrote a book called The Presentation of Self in Everyday Life. And we know from sociology that at some level, we are all role playing in everything that we do. That's part of the human condition. On the other hand, taking off that mask, sort of shedding the wardrobe of the performer, is in some ways for the individual liberating, and for the people on the outside, like actually really interesting and compelling in a way that the performance is not.
So let me ask you, how did you get obsessed with this and take the bold step? I mean, it is a bold step of sitting there at your desk and saying, I am going to expansivily look at this question. Did I lose you there?
Yeah, well, no.
Are you exhausted?
I appreciate your, I do, honestly, I appreciate your recognizing the grind it was to read through 16,000 regrets.
Well, not even read through. I'm even thinking of something else. I'm thinking, what sparked the idea that you, Daniel Pink, your next big subject has to be regret? And then how do you not get overwhelmed by the sheer magnitude of having to address it in a substantive, meaningful, original way?
Well, I mean, I got into it. It's interesting. It's another interesting question. And, you and I are somewhat similarly situated. I would not have written this book in my 30s. I don't think that I had the mileage or I don't think I had the mileage on me. I don't think that I had the perspective. And in some ways, writing this felt inevitable in my 50s, because I'm at that point in my life where I look back and there's some distance there for once, not in the way there wasn't when I was in my 30s. But, knock wood, I look forward and there's some distance in that direction too. And so I think that being at that point in my life was one of the things that sort of made me open to this idea. And then the other thing that I mean, sort of the specific, I don't want to say trigger, but the specific spark was my elder daughter's college graduation a couple of years ago, where I was sitting at this graduation. It's it was a big school, so it's like really long, and there's all the and her last name starts with P, so there's a lot of waiting, and I was just thinking about my own college experience, and I had this weird thing where it's like I can't believe this kid is 22 now, because it seems like she was born yesterday. But then the other thing is, like, I can't believe I have a kid who's 22 because I'm only 27. Like, I just graduated from college a couple of years ago. And so I'm having this like sort of weird, and then I started thinking about like, well, what was my college like? And I realized that I had a lot of regrets. I had regrets about not being kind enough to people. I had regrets about not taking enough chances. I had regrets about my kind of diligence. And exactly to your point, when I came back, I just happened to mention it to a few people, and what I found is that it was a subject in which people leaned in. They didn't recoil from it in the way that the no regrets philosophy suggests. They instead, oh, that's so interesting because I'm like, whoa, wait a second. I'm getting a kind of, I mean, you're an interviewer. You have a sense when people are, on your wavelength or really resonating
Yes.
with what you're doing. And I just got a sense like, wow, wait a second. There's a kind of deeper electric response to this that I'm not seeing in other things. And I started thinking about what do we know about regret? And I started looking at some of the research, and I found it pretty interesting because again, it debunked this absurd idea of no regrets.
It's so interesting. It didn't come through a personal crisis. And this is the whole thing of creativity research. It's like it wasn't expected. You weren't searching for an idea. It came to you. It was an honest feeling and you latched onto it.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think that, what I do as a writer is at some level, like really undramatic, like what we tend to think about, like I've never had an epiphany. I've never bolted upright in bed and said, "Oh my gosh, it's different." That's not how I don't think that's how it works. It's more.
And it's so interesting. You do not regret. I can hear it. You, Daniel Pink, do not regret ever having experienced an epiphany, because epiphany doesn't represent boldness. The boldness is taking an insight and taking it to where you went. You mentioned, I have one more question about regrets, and then I just have a final question because I want to circle back to that first book we spoke about of yours, which still I live with in my brain and it impacts me. But you said something earlier that the research shows we human beings are programmed for regret. What does that mean, and where did that come from?
Well, this is what some of the research says. Is that our cognitive machinery is programmed for regret. Because here's the thing, regret is functional. Okay, like it does something for us. And so imagine if we were unable to experience regret. So I was one of the regrets that people have is that what I call foundation regrets. They regret not saving money. They regret not working hard enough in school. They regret not taking care of their bodies. But imagine if I was incapable of experiencing that. I would say, oh man, no, I have no regrets about never exercising. And then I get to the point where I'm in my 50s and it's like, I'm massively overweight and unhealthy. So, but if I have the capacity to feel regret about that, that spear of regret makes me say, oh, wait a second, there's something gone wrong here. Is there, instead of denying that or wallowing in it, can I extract a lesson from it? And that's why it's functional. This is why, I mean, it's very interesting in the research. This is why people with neurodegenerative diseases, some Parkinson's sufferers, some Huntington sufferers, certain kinds of brain lesions, they can't experience regret. That the inability to experience regret is a sign of a grave disorder. And it's because we need to be able to experience regret to learn and improve and do better. Human beings who can't experience regret aren't going to make it very, very far.
So now let me just come full circle back to that original book, To Sell is Human, The Surprising Truth of Moving Others. And I mean, there's so much material in there that actually I almost want to ask an open-ended question, because your work, clearly there are overlapping themes and marriages of ideas that you can have. But you mentioned this idea when people hear, well, you said when you're an interviewer and if you're on the same wavelength, you talked about the importance in salesmanship of listening, really being attuned to the other person. But more broadly speaking, I'm just thinking of that book. Like, if there is one other takeaway we can get for the upcoming new year, we all want to be more effective, even than we are, in moving other people, whether it's towards an idea or towards a sale of a product or whatever it is. So give us a couple of New Year's tips from your
Absolutely.
earlier work.
Totally. So there's some really good. I mean, there's some really interesting stuff in that body of research. So one of the things that has, I'll give you. I mean, I got all kinds of ones. So one of the things that has helped me a lot is that if you want to change someone's behavior, you really need to focus on making it easy for them to act. That is, we sometimes spend too little time making it easy for people to act and too much time trying to change their mind. People don't like trying to change their mind, but if you just make it easy for them to act, you make it easy for them to do something, they don't have to change their mind. There's all kinds of evidence on this in raising money for charity. It's all so for instance, let's even something very small. I'll give you an example. Like I was thinking about this the other day. I went to CVS, right, and they gave me the option of rounding up my donation in order to give to a charity, rounding up my total. So it's like $34.13. You want to round it up to $35, and we'll give that 87-cent difference to a particular charity. They asked me the question. All I had to do was click yes. If they had said, Dan, would you like to support this blah, blah, blah charity at some, it's like, well, I don't, but again, like I'm donating to this charity because they made it so easy for me to do that. So make it easy for people to do what you want them to do. Really focus on that off ramp. Human beings sometimes resist changing their mind, but they're less likely to resist. They're less likely to resist just making it easy for somebody to do something.
And there's one other thing that you said, which I think is so empowering. This idea of, did you call it motivational interviewing?
Oh yeah, that's a good one. I mean, Irvin Yalom probably uses that. Yeah. So yeah, that's a really interesting one. It's like it's because it's a therapeutic technique, and essentially what it is this. You have to deploy it carefully. So let's say somebody is really resisting doing something. Let's take an uncontroversial topic, vaccines. All right. And you have an uncle who doesn't want to get a vaccine. And so you could like try to, so one thing that you could do is try to make it easy for the uncle to do that. Hey, uncle, I'm making an appointment for myself to get this done. Do you want me to do it for you? And and then I'm actually driving there. I'm driving to the site myself, and I'm happy to make the appointment for you, and get that kind of thing. Rather than saying, "You idiot, why aren't you getting a vaccine? Everybody knows vaccines." So just make it easy for them. But the other thing on motivational interviewing is this: you can say to Uncle Harry, "Hey, Uncle Harry, yeah, I know. I see you don't want to get a vaccine. About on a scale of 0 to 10, on a scale of 1 to 10." How ready are you to get a vaccine? And Harry might say, I'm a 2. And now when we hear that, our instinct is to say, Harry, you fool, you got to get a vaccine. Instead of berating him for being a 2 on a scale of 1 to 10, you say, well, Uncle Harry, why didn't you pick a lower number? And he says, well, I've heard some things about it might be useful, and I'm 71 years old, and I heard that. And so he starts articulating his own reasons for doing something. And this is also really axiomatic in persuasion, is that you want to surface people's own reasons for doing something rather than have them take your reason. This is a parenting 101. And so if you can make it easy for people to act and surface their own reasons for doing something, you're going to be a much better persuader.
I mean, this can apply to every issue that matters imaginable. And it also gets into your riff, and you did some really great writing on this, the art of improv and how this fits in. And it's the obvious rule, right? And not but, yes, but it's the same framing. Yes, a number 2, and why not number 1?
Yes. And the other thing about it, going to the improv, is that one of the rules of improv, and it's central to successful improv actors, is one of the central rules. I'm obsessed with the value of improv for persuasion, as you know. One of the rules, as you said, is to say yes and. So again, exactly saying, so you're 2, yes, and why aren't you? The other thing, there are 2 other things. One is to hear offers, And so even Uncle Harry saying he's a 2 is a little bit of an offer. He's not saying he's a 0. So you have to hear a little bit of an offer there. The other one, which is important, also in terms of giving people their own reason for doing something, and this is getting to this in a roundabout way, is that a central rule of improv is to make the other person look good. Make the other person look good. Improv is not about, hey, look at my funny thing. It's like you're trying to make the other person look good. And when everybody's trying to make each other look good, everybody looks good.
And to make everybody look good and to work like that, people have to trust each other, yep, which is something we are currently struggling with in our society. Is your next book maybe trust?
The incredible erosion of trust. I mean, it's an interesting issue. I mean, about 20 years ago, Francis Fukuyama wrote a big, thick book called Trust, about how really about the economy of trust and how our whole economic system hinges on trust. I mean, when I take out, back in the days when we learned we use cash, if I took out I have some. Do I have any cash in here? I have some. Okay, so let's take a look. So this is for. I actually happen to have like some extra British currency. So when I take this out right here, there's a 10-pound note, but it's just a piece of paper. This is a joke, but we trust that it's actually worth something. And so trust is important, and trust is being corroded by bad actors, by misinformation, and that's a hard problem.
Well, thank you for agreeing to do your next book on trust. I hope you listen, I just want to say one phrase, and then I want to thank you, because you used a phrase. It was one of the most beautiful phrases about age. You said, you and I are somewhat similarly situated. I appreciate that, because today is actually my birthday. I'm a little older than 50s.
Happy birthday.
Thank you. I just hit 62. People, all right. Well, why are you working on your birthday? This is such a joy to speak with you. So I really, really deeply appreciate it. And
but you're honoring Studs Terkel, because here's the thing: we're coming completely full circle, Michael. We talked at the top about how work is a source for daily meaning, and here you are on your birthday making meaning. What finer tribute to your time on this planet than to do something that you find meaningful? I mean, it's inspiring.
Thank you for putting words to that. I really do appreciate that. And Dan, as always, really great pleasure. And I can't wait. I am going to buy a hard copy too, but I ordered the version on my iPad, so it's going to pop up automatically on February what?
February 1, it comes out. So far, we seem to have eluded some of the supply chain problems, but I do have these visions of 100,000 hardcover books floating off the coast of Long Beach. So you can, if anybody hits that situation, you can download the digital version or download the audio version.
Well, the power of regret, how looking backward moves us forward. Happy New Year, Dan Pink.
Same to you. Thanks for having me, Michael.